What is up, y'all, and welcome to Week 5 Dynasty Talk with Sam. The topic we're going to be going over today is we're going to do Week 5 Dynasty risers and fallers, right? Guys that are shooting up our ranks, but with that, that means we're going to have some guys that are falling as well. So there's going to be some people falling in the ranks, right? So we're going to cover 5 risers and 5 fallers. Stay tuned after the intro. So I'm stoked to get in today's topic, right? This is what Dynasty is all about. It's the stock market of fantasy football, right? What players are gaining value, what players are losing value, who can we be ahead of the curve on, who can we, who are we behind the curve on, which is what we don't want to happen. So today we're going to cover some players that are rising up my personal ranks and gaining value in my eyes. And we're also going to cover some guys that are losing value for me. And what can we do with this information is we can attack some of these players that are maybe rising in value, and maybe we can get off some of these players that are falling. So first off, for me, I'm going to make this really easy. Kenneth Walker is a riser. This dude looks like a stud. He looks like a top 8 dynasty running back. You could honestly even put him higher. This summer, I think people were a little worried because, Zach Charbonnet, Sab Cav, the wine man himself, was added to the backfield, and he looks fine. I still got nothing against Charbonnet. I think he looks like a solid player. But Walker's the guy here. He looks really good. They're feeding him. He's scoring, 18.4 PPR points a game. That's an RB1. And the dude is still young. He's on his rookie contract. And the Seahawks look good. Geno looks good. The defense looks pretty good for Seattle. And Pete Carroll's a great coach. So I don't really see any reason that anything's going to change much. I do expect Charbonnet to maybe increase his touches slightly. But Walker is the guy in this backfield, and I don't see that changing. So number 2, someone that's rising up my ranks is someone that this one came out a little more out of nowhere for us. I think a lot of people did like Nico Collins, but I don't think anyone saw this coming. 20.7 PPR points a game to start the season off. 3 just absolute monster games for Nico. And I think a lot of that has to do with CJ Stroud just looks really good, right? He looks like the best passing rookie. And what happens when you have a good passer and you have good game script, the wide receivers are going to eat. And Nico seems to be the guy that is benefiting most from that. I do like Tank Dell, but Nico's just got a bigger body, and I'd be more willing to trust in his talent and his size moving forward. I'm not shying away from Dell. I still really like his speed. But Nico's the guy for me right now. Now, the only thing to worry about would be maybe next year they add a quote-unquote wide receiver 1, a T. Higgins comes over or something. But keep in mind that they don't have their first-round pick, so unless they sign that guy in free agency, it's not going to be a first-round rookie coming in, which could benefit Nico and Tank Dell, right? So I think Nico Collins is a guy that I'd buy into. If you could go get him for a couple seconds, that's the price. I don't think I'm up at a first yet for Nico Collins, just because as good as CJ Stroud has looked, he is still a rookie, and people are going to slowly figure him out, I think. But Nico Collins has been benefited from Stroud's great play, and I'm a believer. Next is going to be Brock Purdy. I just think at this point, you take the end of last season and the beginning of this season, and Purdy looks like the real deal. 18.29 fantasy points per game. He looks like a low-end QB1, high-end QB2. Great offense, great weapons. Let's not overthink this one. He's just played well in about every single game. The Niners are going to be in every game, and they have so many good players, and Purdy just has to get the ball to those guys. So I don't really see any reason to not believe in Purdy anymore. He's worth a first-round pick for sure. If you need a quarterback, go get Brock Purdy and let him be your quarterback too if you have Herbert or one of those studs as your QB1. Purdy's a great guy to pair there. Or if you're a contender, Purdy's a great guy to be your 2-3 kind of flex quarterback. Bye weeks, matchup play, your quarterback 2 kind of thing. Go get Brock Purdy. This one is just Keenan Allen, man, is just balling. I was very high on Justin Herbert this offseason, but 25.74 PPR points per game for Keenan Allen. I don't think anyone saw this coming. We know Keenan Allen's a great player, but from what I've seen, he is closer to the Diggs Tyreek tier than maybe where he was before the season in the Hopkins Mike Evans tier, right? He looks great in that offense. And with no Mike Williams, I don't really see the targets going down for Keenan Allen. Now, he's going to have to stay healthy. This is something that Keenan Allen has struggled with throughout his career. But that offense looks great. Kellen Moore is getting the ball to Keenan Allen. Herbert looks amazing. And the defense is just bad enough that they're going to have to score some points in most of their games. So if you're a contender and you need a wide receiver, Keenan Allen should be at the top of your list. And our last riser we're going to go over is someone that I spoke a lot about this offseason, and I'm still buying in, and that's David Montgomery. I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's a great talent, but 19.97 fantasy points per game. Obviously, he missed the one, so this is an average of the 3 games he has played, and one of them being that massive 3-touchdown performance last week. But even so, David Montgomery is in the Jamal Williams role from last year, but he's a better player. So he's getting the touchdowns, he's getting more yards per carry, and he's not going anywhere. Gibbs could totally get more touches, and I think he will. And I think it could be positive for Gibbs as the season progresses, and I'm not too concerned yet with him. But that doesn't mean I can't be excited about David Montgomery too, right? In this landscape of dynasty RBs right now, where we can only really trust 5 to 10 guys, Montgomery's right at the edge of that. Right. And we're going to talk about some RBs that I'm losing faith in a little later. But Montgomery is the RB1 on a good offense, and he's the red zone back. And those are all things we look for with RBs, redraft, or dynasty. So you got to buy into David Montgomery if you need running back production. So just to go over our risers for week 5, Kenneth Walker, Nico Collins, Brock Purdy, Keenan Allen, David Montgomery, right? All guys that I think you should be acquiring if you can get the right price, that are going to help you win this year and into the future, maybe a little more short term with a guy like Keenan Allen, David Montgomery. But Purdy, Collins, and Walker could be building blocks in your team for years to come. So now we're going to transition into our fallers. You know, with guys coming up the ranks, rising up, players got to fall. And we're going to cover some of the guys that I think are falling for me right now. First off, Dalvin Cook. I don't think our expectations were huge going into the year, but with no Aaron Rodgers, and in combination with Dalvin Cook just not looking good, I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Carter overtakes him by the end of the year. Michael Carter looks better than Dalvin Cook. 4.45 fantasy points per game, PPR points. And that's with Breece Hall getting worked into the offense, not fully taking over yet. I really don't think it's going to get any better for Dalvin Cook. So at this point, if you can get out for a 2, I would even take a couple 3s. Maybe try to sell him to the Breece Hall owner just as he needs a handcuff or something. But I would be concerned because Dalvin Cook does not look good, and that offense cannot support 2 running backs. Here's another one that's going to be tough for you guys to hear, but Rhamondre Stevenson, coming off a great year last year, he's only averaging 10.78 fantasy points per game, and I think he still looks like a good player, but if the usage isn't there like it was last year, it's going to be hard for Rhamondre. Zeke hasn't been great, but he has been involved, which was a fear of all of ours. And without the touchdowns and that low-scoring New England offense, Rhamondre just doesn't have the upside he had last year. A lot of his production came from very high PPR games where he was getting 5-6 catches, and that hasn't been there yet, and he hasn't really had any breakaway runs. So I would be very scared for Rhamondre. I would be trying to move him everywhere. You know, if you could capitalize on Rhamondre and maybe get a guy like A-Chain, David Montgomery plus would be something I would totally do if I want running back production. I just think the time may be up for Stevenson to be an elite RB1, and it doesn't usually come back for these dynasty RBs if they lose a step. I think I'd be trying to get out. Next is we're going to go tight end just to cover someone, and that's going to be Dalton Schultz. It's been amazing that Stroud has looked so good and Dalton Schultz has been involved so little. 6.22 fantasy points per game. It doesn't sound terrible, but he got the score last week, so that's propping his stats up a bit. But he just doesn't have the target numbers. And coming over from Dallas, I think people hope that he was going to be a little more involved in the offense. You know, he had Dak. He was being peppered with a lot more targets. But Stroud's sharing the ball around, and Schultz just doesn't really look to be a key part of this offense. He's on a one-year deal, so that's the only positive. You know, things could change. Maybe he goes to a different situation next year. But I think the more and more we see of Dalton Schultz, it seems like he was just a part of that Dallas system that's showing Jake Ferguson can look fine in it, right? Schultz doesn't seem to be an elite talent, and I just don't think the touches are there for him. I'd be trying to move on from him, or I just think you probably have better options on your bench at this point. You know, Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet, maybe you drafted Laporta, Kincaid. All these guys are going to start going ahead and being started ahead of Dalton Schultz at this point. And you probably have already been starting them ahead of Dalton Schultz because last game really shouldn't convince you of everything. Next is going to be quarterback, and that's going to be Desmond Ridder. I wasn't ever huge on Desmond Ridder. I wasn't ever really a believer. But after watching that London game, it is just not there. I don't think he's going to make it throughout the season. And from that point on, I just think he's going to be a perennial backup in the NFL. So if someone still needs a quarterback and you're able to sell him as a quote unquote starter while he still is one, I think you got to move on from him. I would take a second. I would package him in a third for a second. Those are the kind of trades I'll be trying to do with Desmond Ridder right now, unless you're so needy for quarterback that you just have to hang on to him. But you can't be happy with anything you've seen. He doesn't have elite upside. He's not running the ball. He's just turning around and handing it off. And he's not utilizing the weapons there in Atlanta. So I just don't like at all what I've seen. And I'm trying to move off Ridder as soon as I can. Next is going to be a wide receiver, and that's going to be Rashod Bateman. I still think Bateman's got some talent, but Zay Jones is the guy. I mean, not Zay Jones. I'm sorry. Zay Flowers is the guy in Baltimore. And they just do not have the offensive production to have multiple wide receivers be productive in that offense. If Andrews is going to be a top tight end, Lamar is going to run touchdowns in himself, and Zay Flowers looks great. He's going to be the leading receiver there. And if Bateman can't produce with Odell out even, Odell isn't great, but he's going to be slightly involved once he comes back. So I just don't think there's room for Bateman. Now, could you maybe buy low on him and hope he goes somewhere after Baltimore? Of course, you know, that's definitely something that could happen. But injuries mixed with low production just tend me to think that I would go find someone that still believes in Rashod Bateman and pawn him off to him. Second round, could you get it? Maybe Rashod Bateman and a third for a second. Really similar to that Ridder path where I would be trying to trade Bateman for just someone you need on your team or some draft capital so you can go attack next year's class, which looks really deep. So just to cover our fallers for the day, Dalvin Cook, Rhamondre Stevenson, Dalton Schultz, Desmond Ridder, Rashod Bateman. So these are all guys that are just falling in my ranks. And I think the floor could really fall out on these guys really fast. So I would be trying to move them and get whatever you can. You know, I'm not taking fourth round picks for these guys. That's not what I mean when I say get whatever you can. But I just think that it just isn't looking good. And I would be concerned as to the outlook for them for the rest of the season. You know, redraft is what it is. Stevenson, you're probably holding on to in redraft unless you can make some elite trade. But in Dynasty, people are still going to see him as a young asset, and someone's going to be needy enough with all the RBs going down this year that Stevenson could really help them. So I would attack someone you like with Stevenson, or even just a first-round pick and then use that to either draft someone next year or just reload your team. So thank you guys for tuning in to this Week 5 episode. I'm really happy to talk about really the ups and downs of Dynasty. Let me know if there's any other guys you think should be on this list, right? Comment them in the video below. I'd love to give you my take on some other guys if they're rising and falling on your board. Or hit me up on Twitter at Where's Waldorf. I'd be happy to talk about anyone. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.